Someone get that child back to the visitors gallery. This is a symposium, not a daycare. Dr. Lawrence Whitfield waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly, not even bothering to look at the small black boy standing at the microphone. His voice dripped with contempt as it echoed through the Boston Convention Center auditorium. Did no one check credentials at the door? This forum is for serious researchers, not children playing mathematician. Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd of 800 people. The boy's papers slipped from his trembling hands and scattered across the stage floor. "I'm sorry, sir." His voice was barely above a whisper. Quiet, polite, the kind of voice that had learned, over years of small humiliations, to make itself smaller. Dr. Whitfield squinted at his tablet with theatrical skepticism. "Presentation from Booker T. Washington Elementary?" He looked up, scanning the audience like he was sharing a private joke. "Is this some kind of outreach program?" More laughter now, louder. The boy's face burned. What none of them knew, what not a single person in that gleaming auditorium understood, was that this terrified 10-year-old had just done something impossible, something no mathematician on Earth had managed in 30 years. His name was Elijah Brooks, 10 years old, thick glasses that slid perpetually down his nose, a button-up shirt 2 sizes too big, borrowed from his cousin specifically for this day. Right now, standing on that stage under those blinding lights with his papers scattered around his feet, he wanted nothing more than to disappear entirely. The annual New England Youth Mathematics Symposium drew the brightest young mathematical minds in the region for 3 days of presentations and competition. Except the bright young minds assembled here all shared a certain look, a certain background. Phillips Exeter Academy, Milton Academy, Boston Latin School, the kind of institutions with Olympic swimming pools and robotics labs worth more than Elijah's entire school building. Elijah attended Booker T. Washington Elementary in Roxbury. No advanced mathematics program, no competition math team. Just library books, YouTube videos, and a notebook he'd purchased with his own birthday money. Dr. Lawrence Whitfield presided over the judges' table like a king surveying his court. 58 years old, tenured professor at MIT, department head. His signature alone was worth millions in research grants. One word from him could launch a career or end it before it ever started. He had already decided Elijah didn't belong here, and he wasn't the only one. "Excuse me, son, are you lost?" That was the security guard at the entrance, 3 separate times. Each time Elijah had produced his registration badge. Each time the guard looked surprised, then skeptical, then reluctantly stepped aside. In the bathroom, 2 boys from Phillips Exeter stood at the sinks in their tailored blazers, voices carrying freely because it never occurred to them to lower their voices. "Did you see that kid in the waiting room? What's he even doing here?" Probably some diversity thing. You know how they are now. Elijah had stayed in the stall until their footsteps faded. The symposium ran on an unspoken hierarchy. At the top sat students from families where both parents held PhDs, where dinner conversation included words like topology and eigenvalues, where summers meant math camps at Stanford or MIT rather than watching your little sister while your mother worked double shifts. Elijah existed somewhere the hierarchy didn't have a category for. He was presenting on the Hartwell conjecture, a problem that had haunted mathematics since 1987. Dr. James Hartwell, a British mathematician, had posed what sounded like a deceptively simple question about coloring infinite graphs. Could you color any planar graph with 4 colors so that no 2 connected regions shared the same color, even when the graph extended infinitely? Simple to state, impossible to solve. For 38 years, hundreds of the world's finest mathematical minds had attempted it. Doctoral students had constructed entire dissertations around failed approaches. Tenured professors at elite universities had published proposed solutions only to watch them torn apart in peer review. The Hartwell conjecture occupied that special, cruel category of problems, easy enough for a child to understand, resistant enough to humble the greatest experts alive. Dr. Whitfield himself had spent 3 decades in pursuit of it. 7 published papers, dozens of conference presentations, millions in research funding. He hadn't solved it either. Elijah didn't know this yet, but 6 months ago, working alone during lunch periods in the school library, he had found something, a pattern, a way of seeing the problem that no one else had thought to try. He had filled page after page of his birthday money notebook with colored pencil drawings of graphs, testing his idea, checking his logic, following wherever the mathematics led. He thought he had found an interesting observation, something worth sharing. He had no idea he had actually solved it. 40 people crowded around a projection screen at the Roxbury Community Math Center, watching what was unfolding on the live stream. Kids from the neighborhood, parents who had taken time off work, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, who ran the center and who had been the one to convince Elijah to submit his work to the symposium in the first place, sat in the front row with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. On the screen, Elijah stood frozen at the microphone while Whitfield dismissed him like an inconvenience. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, tugged on Dr. Okonkwo's sleeve. "Why is that man being mean to Elijah?" Dr. Okonkwo didn't have a good answer, not one a 7-year-old would understand, not one that wouldn't crack something fragile and irreplaceable inside that little girl's hope. "Sometimes people make mistakes about other people," she said quietly, "but Elijah is about to show them how wrong they are." She hoped she was right. She hoped they would give him the chance. Back on that stage, Elijah bent down to gather his scattered papers. His hands shook so badly he dropped them twice. 800 people watched him scramble on his knees. Some in the audience looked uncomfortable. Most looked away. Whitfield checked his watch and sighed like this was all a spectacular waste of his valuable time. What none of them understood yet was that the next 5 minutes would change everything. Elijah finally gathered his papers and stood. His legs felt like water. "Young man," Whitfield's voice cut through the murmuring, "this forum is for original mathematical research. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir." Barely audible. "I have observations on the Hartwell conjecture, the one about planar graph colorings." The room went still. Several judges leaned forward simultaneously. The Hartwell conjecture was legendary in mathematics, unsolved for nearly 40 years, the kind of problem that defined careers, the kind of problem that great mathematicians mentioned in hushed tones. Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. "The Hartwell conjecture?" He exchanged a glance with the judge beside him. "Son, doctoral students have attempted that problem. Tenured professors at the world's finest universities have failed at it." Paused for emphasis. "Are you telling me you've solved it?" He made air quotes around the word. More laughter from the audience. "I don't know if I solved it, sir. I just found a pattern, something maybe nobody saw before." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "A pattern you didn't see." Whitfield leaned back in his chair, letting the silence stretch, letting everyone absorb the full absurdity of what this child was claiming. Then he stood, walked to the board, and wrote with sharp, practiced strokes. A sequence appeared: 2, 6, 12, 20, 30. "Before we waste everyone's time, let's do a little warm-up. Simple problem. What's the formula for the nth term and why?" It was a trap. Everyone in the room recognized it. The problem was trivial for any competition math student. N squared plus n. But Whitfield wasn't testing Elijah's mathematics. He was testing whether Elijah belonged in this room at all. The audience waited. Some pulled out phones. Chairs shifted uncomfortably. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo leaned toward the screen. "Come on, baby. Show them." Elijah stared at the board. His mind was racing. He knew the answer. That part was almost insultingly easy. But something else had caught his attention. "The nth term is n times n plus 1. It's the product of consecutive integers." "Correct." Whitfield sounded almost disappointed. "Now, if we could move on to—" "But that's not the interesting part, sir." Whitfield stopped, turned. "Oh?" "The interesting part is that your sequence is wrong." You could have heard a pin drop from the back of the auditorium. "Excuse me?" Whitfield's voice had developed an edge. "You wrote 2, 6, 12, 20, 30 on the board, but look at the projection screen behind you." Every head turned. The screen was mirroring the digital board, but due to a glitch in the software, one number appeared duplicated. The sequence on screen read differently than what Whitfield had written. If your sequence actually has 20 twice, then the formula breaks down, which means either there's a transcription error or you meant a different problem entirely. Elijah adjusted his glasses. "In mathematics, we're supposed to verify our assumptions first. That's what you wrote in your 2018 paper on axiomatic systems." He paused. I read it. Silence. Complete, absolute, ringing silence. Then, from somewhere in the back of the auditorium, someone laughed, not at Elijah, at the situation, at the staggering fact that a 10-year-old had just corrected Dr. Lawrence Whitfield using Whitfield's own published methodology. In Roxbury, the community center erupted in cheers. Kids leapt from their seats screaming. Dr. Okonkwo gripped her armrest so tightly her knuckles turned white. On stage, Whitfield stared at the projection screen. His face had gone pale. He had just been fact-checked by a child he was trying to humiliate in front of everyone on a live stream. Whitfield recovered quickly. You don't become department head at MIT without learning to handle public embarrassment with grace. Well, his smile was tight enough to cut glass. Congratulations on your reading comprehension. Now, your actual presentation. You have 5 minutes. Elijah's hands trembled as he connected his flash drive to the presentation system. What appeared on screen made several audience members blink in confusion. Hand-drawn graphs, colored pencils, uneven handwriting. It looked like a child's homework assignment, because it was. Dr. Hartwell's conjecture asks if every planar graph can be colored with 4 colors so that no 2 regions sharing an edge have the same color. And this has to work even when the graph extends infinitely. Elijah's voice was soft but clear. He had practiced this part 100 times in front of his bathroom mirror. Dr. Hartwell first asked this in 1987. Since then, hundreds of mathematicians have tried to solve it. Nobody has succeeded. He clicked to his next slide, a simple animation showing finite graphs versus infinite ones. The 4-color theorem works for finite graphs. We know that for certain. But the infinite case is where everyone gets stuck. Whitfield leaned forward slightly. Despite everything, despite himself, he was curious. It thinks everyone got stuck because they were looking at it like a graph problem. Elijah clicked again. His slide showed a bathroom floor, tiles extending outward in a pattern. Simple and visual, something anyone could understand. But what if it's actually a tiling problem? He walked the audience through several examples. Each one showed a different repeating pattern extending infinitely. Dr. Hartwell's question asks if coloring works for every possible infinite arrangement. But that's like asking what the biggest number is. There is no answer, because the question itself has a problem. At the back of the auditorium, Dr. Patricia Ruiz from Stanford sat up straight. She could see exactly where this was going. But if you add one rule, one constraint, the problem becomes solvable. If you only look at periodic tilings, tilings that repeat in a pattern, then 4 colors always work, and I can prove why. The room erupted in urgent whispers. Judges leaned toward one another. Audience members who were mathematicians began pulling out tablets, already trying to check the logic in real time. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo gripped her armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's my boy," she whispered. "That's my boy." But Whitfield was not finished. "Interesting, truly." He stood, walked to the board. "But you're making a classical student error. You're confusing sufficiency with necessity. Just because periodic tilings work doesn't mean the general case is impossible." He drew quickly. A complex graph with dozens of nodes and edges, his hand moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Here, this infinite graph is non-periodic. By your logic, it should fail the 4-color test." He began coloring. Blue, red, yellow, green. Precise, practiced, showing off clearly, demonstrating mastery in front of a captive audience. "You see? 4 colors, non-periodic graph. Your argument collapses." Several people in the audience nodded. It looked like Elijah's presentation had just fallen apart entirely. Elijah stared at the board. His face went pale. 800 people watched him, 50,000 more on the live stream, all waiting to see him break. This was the moment most kids would give up, would apologize, would slink off that stage and spend years trying to forget this had ever happened. The silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then Elijah spoke so quietly that people in the back leaned forward to hear him. "Dr. Whitfield, can you zoom in on the top right corner of your graph?" Whitfield's hand froze mid-gesture. "Why?" "Because you made the same mistake I made in my first draft." He let that land. Node 47 and node 52. They're both blue and they share an edge. Your counterexample is wrong. The room exploded. Judges rushed toward the screen. Whitfield zoomed in with hands that weren't entirely steady, and there it was, clear as anything, undeniable. Two adjacent nodes, both blue, connected by an edge. Elijah was right. Dr. Samuel Brooks from Harvard stood to get a better look. He was a black professor, one of only a handful in top mathematics departments, and he knew precisely what it cost to be right in rooms like this one. "He's correct," Brooks said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Nodes 47 and 52, same color, adjacent. The counterexample fails. Whitfield stared at the screen as though it had personally betrayed him. "That's a drafting error. I drew this too quickly." "I know, sir." Elijah's voice was almost gentle. "That's why I use colored pencils, so I can check my work." He held up his notebook, pages upon pages of hand-drawn graphs, each one carefully colored, each one checked and rechecked multiple times. Dr. Ruiz stood. "Elijah, how many nodes was Dr. Whitfield's graph?" 63. "And you spotted the error without zooming in?" "Yes, ma'am. I have good eyes." A few people laughed, not at him, with him. The tension in the room broke just slightly. But what had just happened was not funny. Elijah Brooks, age 10, had held a 63-node graph in his head, analyzed it in real time under crushing pressure, and located a single error among hundreds of possible connections. That wasn't normal. That was savant-level spatial reasoning, the kind of talent that appears perhaps once in a generation. Whitfield was no longer in control of this room. The question was no longer whether Elijah belonged here. The question now was something far more dangerous. What if this child is actually right? "This is highly irregular," Whitfield's voice cut through the murmuring. "So is publicly humiliating a child before he's spoken a word." The response came from Dr. Ruiz, sharp, clear, loud enough for everyone to hear. The audience gasped audibly. "You did not speak to Lawrence Whitfield that way, not if you wanted research funded, not if you wanted papers published." But Ruiz was tenured at Stanford. She no longer needed his approval for anything. Dr. Helen Park, the symposium director, rose from her seat. 60-something, gray hair pulled back, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. "Elijah, can you submit your notebook to the judges panel?" He walked forward and handed it over like he was passing along a piece of his soul, because in a way he was. 6 months of work, every lunch period, every weekend, every quiet moment stolen from watching his sister and helping his grandmother, all of it contained in those pages. "We're going to take a 15-minute recess while the judges review your proof. Please wait in the green room." Elijah nodded and walked off stage on legs that barely held him. The moment he disappeared backstage, the auditorium erupted in chaos. Phones appeared everywhere. People pulled up the live stream to re-watch what had just happened. Urgent, excited conversations broke out in half a dozen languages. In Roxbury, the community center had become complete pandemonium. Kids screaming, adults crying. Someone had started a chant, "Elijah, Elijah, Elijah." In the judges' chamber, 5 professors huddled around a 10-year-old's notebook. Whitfield stood apart from them, arms crossed, staring out the window like he could will the situation into being something other than what it was. "Line 38, page 4, Dr. Brooks ran his finger carefully along Elijah's handwriting. "He's using a non-standard notation for chromatic polynomials." Whitfield stepped closer, seeing an opening. "Non-standard, exactly. Amateur work. He doesn't even know the proper—" "I wasn't finished." Brooks didn't look up. "It's non-standard because it's more efficient. He just reinvented Tut's notation from first principles." A pause. "This child doesn't know he's using graduate-level tools because he invented them himself." Silence in the room. Just the sound of careful pages turning. Page 7. Dr. Ruiz traced a line of reasoning with her finger. "The periodicity lemma here, Lawrence. This builds directly on Hartwell's original framework. He's extending 40 years of research." "That doesn't mean the proof is—" "Page 11. Brooks flipped ahead. His voice had gone quiet, careful, the voice of someone who understands they're looking at something rare. "Every step checks out. The logic holds." He looked up. "The proof is valid." No one spoke. Outside, 15 minutes ticked by. Inside that room, 5 of the world's leading mathematicians stared at a child's colored pencil drawings and understood they were looking at something extraordinary. "So the conjecture is solved?" Dr. Park asked. "The original conjecture, as Hartwell stated it, is ill-posed. Elijah proved that definitively." Ruiz closed the notebook with gentle hands. "But the modified version, with the periodicity constraint—" "Yes," Brooks said the word quietly, with the weight of someone who understood exactly what it meant. "Solved." Whitfield's voice shook when he finally spoke. "We need peer review, external validation. This is a child with a notebook. We cannot simply—" "Lawrence?" Brooks turned to face him. They had known each other for 30 years. Brooks had been Whitfield's teaching assistant once, back when they were both young and hungry, and still believed mathematics was something pure. "The math doesn't care that he's a child. You taught me that, remember?" Whitfield had no answer. What could he say? That he didn't want it to be true? That he had spent 30 years chasing this problem, and a 10-year-old from Roxbury had beaten him to it in 6 months during lunch breaks? They returned to the auditorium. The crowd fell silent instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Park's voice was steady and clear. "After review, the judges' panel has determined that Elijah Brooks's proof requires further examination by external experts. However, our preliminary assessment suggests the work is highly credible." Applause began building. People were rising to their feet. "Due to the significance of this development, we are invoking Rule 47 of the Symposium Charter." The rule appeared on the screen behind her. "In cases of exceptional discovery, the presenter may be invited to defend their work before the full academic assembly. Elijah, would you be willing to present your proof in detail tomorrow morning with questions from the full conference faculty?" In the green room, watching on a monitor, Elijah's face drained of color. Tomorrow was the professional track. Real mathematicians, doctoral candidates, postdocs, people who had spent entire careers studying this problem. If he said yes, he would stand before 600 experts and defend his work against the most formidable mathematical minds in the world. If he failed, the entire world would watch him come apart. His phone buzzed. "Dr. Okonkwo, you can say no. No one will think less of you." His thumbs hovered over the screen. Then he typed back, "Will Dr. Whitfield have to apologize if I'm right?" The response came instantly, in front of everyone. Elijah took a single breath, walked back onto the stage, and looked directly at Dr. Park. "Yes, ma'am, I'll do it." The crowd roared, but Elijah wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Whitfield, and Whitfield was looking back. 14 hours. That was how long Elijah had to prepare for the most important presentation of his life. 7 p.m., Roxbury Community Math Center. Dr. Okonkwo sat across from Elijah at a scratched-up table, her notebook open between them. She was not being gentle tonight. There was no time for gentle. "What if they ask about non-Hausdorff topologies?" Elijah blinked. "I don't know what that means." "Then we learn it right now." She pulled out a textbook. 8:30 p.m., video call on a borrowed laptop. Dr. Brooks appeared on screen from his Harvard office. Behind him, shelves of mathematics texts stretched floor to ceiling. His office at midnight looked the same as most people's offices at noon. He did not sleep much. "Elijah, they're going to test whether you understand or whether you memorized. Know the difference." For the next hour, Brooks ran Socratic questioning, never giving answers, forcing Elijah to find them himself. It was brutal. It was necessary. "Explain the periodicity constraint 3 different ways." Elijah stumbled on the second explanation, recovered, found his footing. By the third, his voice was steady. "Good," Brooks said simply. "That's how you know you truly understand something, when you can teach it differently each time." 9 p.m., Elijah's kitchen. His grandmother set down a plate, macaroni and cheese made the way she had made it since he was old enough to sit in a high chair. "Baby, why are you doing this? You already showed them you're smart." Elijah pushed the food around his plate. His stomach had been in knots since the afternoon. "Because Dr. Whitfield said I don't belong there, Grandma, and if I don't finish this, he'll always be right."
She reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from years of sorting mail, lifting packages, working jobs that had destroyed her back so her grandson could have a chance at something better. Then let's make sure he's wrong. She kissed his forehead and went to make coffee. It was going to be a long night for both of them. 9:45. The phone rang. Unknown number. Elijah almost didn't answer. Something made him pick up. "Is this Elijah Brooks?" A woman's voice, nervous, speaking quietly like she didn't want to be overheard. "Yes. My name is Dr. Rachel Kim. I'm a postdoc in Dr. Whitfield's lab at MIT. I just wanted to say, what you did today was incredible." Elijah waited. There was more coming. He could hear it in the careful way she was breathing. "Lawrence, Dr. Whitfield, he's been making calls all evening, trying to find errors in your proof, calling in favors, contacting people in Europe and Asia. Did he find any?" A long pause. "No, that's why he's panicking. Just be ready tomorrow. He's going to try to break you." The line dead. Elijah stared at the phone. His hands were shaking. 10:30 p.m. Bathroom mirror. He was practicing his presentation for the one felt like the 100th time, trying to keep his voice from cracking. Every time he reached the third slide, his hands started to tremble. He tried again, and again, and again. Dr. Okonkwo's face appeared in the video call window, balanced on the edge of the sink. "You know what the difference is between you and those other students at the symposium? They're smarter than me?" "No." Her voice was firm. "They've been told they're smart their whole lives. They've had tutors and private schools and parents who could hire experts. You had to prove it every single day." She leaned closer to the camera. "That's your advantage, Elijah. You don't doubt the math. You doubt yourself. Tomorrow, trust the math." 11 p.m. Lying in bed, phone glowing in the dark. He should have been sleeping. He knew he should have been sleeping. Instead, he scrolled through the live stream comments. Most were supportive. People were cheering for him, people who saw themselves in him, who recognized in his story something from their own. But there were others, probably cheated. No way a 10-year-old solved this. Someone helped him. Whitfield would never miss something a kid caught. Each comment was a small knife. By the time he finally put the phone down, he was bleeding from 1,000 cuts. What if they're right? What if I made a mistake? What if I just got lucky yesterday and tomorrow they'll see through me? 6 a.m. Elijah gave up on sleep. He sat at the kitchen table and went through his notes one final time. His grandmother found him there when she woke up. She didn't say a word, just made him breakfast and sat with him in the quiet morning light. 7 a.m. Boston Convention Center. News crews were everywhere. Satellite trucks lined up outside the entrance. This was no longer just a mathematics symposium. This was a story. Underdog kid versus the establishment. David versus Goliath. The media loved nothing more. Security had to escort Elijah through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. A woman in a blue blazer shoved a microphone toward his face. "Elijah, did anyone help you with your proof? Your parents? A teacher?" The question landed like a slap. The implication was unmistakable. Dr. Okonkwo stepped smoothly between them. "His work is his own. Excuse us." Her hand was firm and steady on his shoulder as she guided him inside. 8:45 a.m. Hallway outside the green room. Elijah turned a corner and nearly walked directly into Whitfield. They stood there, just the two of them. No cameras, no audience, no performance. "Elijah," Whitfield's voice was different here, quieter, almost gentle. "Last chance. I spoke with colleagues overnight. Even if your proof is correct, you're going to be asked questions you cannot possibly answer. This isn't about mathematics anymore. It's about optics." He leaned closer. "You will be humiliated today. Not embarrassed like yesterday. Destroyed. For a 10-year-old, that means you'll be the kid who tried instead of the kid who succeeded. Think carefully about what that will feel like." He straightened his tie. "I'm giving you an out, son. Take it." Elijah watched him walk away. His phone buzzed. "Dr. Okonkwo, I'm scared." He stared at his own message for a moment. Then he typed back, "Good. Fear means it matters. Now go show them why. 9 a.m. The doors closed. Ladies and gentlemen, our first presenter this morning is Elijah Brooks. He stepped onto the stage. The lights were brighter than yesterday, hotter. He could barely see past the first few rows. Elijah, the floor is yours. He stepped to the podium, took one breath, and began. The first 5 minutes went smoothly. He explained the Hartwell conjecture's history, how it had resisted every approach for nearly 40 decades, and how he had arrived at a fundamentally different way of seeing it, thinking about tiling patterns rather than graphs. The judges took careful notes. No interruptions yet. At the 6-minute mark, Whitfield raised his hand. Point of clarification, you state the original conjecture is ill-posed. Can you define that term? Elijah had prepared for this. It means the question doesn't have enough constraints to guarantee a unique answer. I know what it means. Whitfield's voice was patient, the way a trap is patient. What I'm asking is whether you know what it means formally in the context of Hadamard's criteria for well-posed problems. Elijah's mind went blank. I don't know what Hadamard's criteria are. Murmurs rippled through the audience. You see, everyone, this is the challenge with prodigies. Whitfield's voice was almost sympathetic. Pattern recognition can be extraordinary, but without foundational knowledge, we cannot distinguish between genuine insight and fortunate accident. Dr. Ruiz leaned forward sharply. Lawrence, he's 10 years old. Hadamard is graduate-level material. Mathematics has no age limit. Either the proof stands on its own merits or it doesn't. I'm simply ensuring rigor. Whitfield placed a document on the desk with a soft, deliberate thud. I'd also like to submit that overnight I contacted Dr. Yuki Tanaka at Kyoto University, a specialist in infinite graph theory, and asked him to review Elijah's proof. The screen behind Elijah flickered to life. An email, Whitfield's name in the header. Regarding the Brooks proof, line 127 assumes bipartite structure holds under infinite extension. This is unproven for non-periodic base cases. Without this, the periodicity lemma fails. The proof is incomplete. The room went utterly silent. Dr. Brooks spoke carefully. Lawrence, you sent Elijah's proof to an external reviewer without permission. I sent a potential solution to an unsolved problem to a colleague. That's standard peer review. Dr. Park turned to Elijah. Do you understand the objection? Elijah's mouth was dry. He's saying I skipped a step. Not skipped. Whitfield walked to the board. Assumed. Your argument is circular. You used your conclusion to prove your conclusion. In mathematics, circular reasoning is fatal. Elijah stared at the screen. Line 127, his own handwriting projected 10 feet high. He had checked everything. He thought he had checked everything. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo gripped her armrests until her knuckles went white. The silence on stage stretched. 10 seconds. 20. Then Elijah looked up. Can I see the line he's referencing? They projected his notebook. Page 8, line 127. His own handwriting filled the screen. He read it once, twice, his mind racing back through logic he had constructed 4 months ago. Dr. Tanaka is right, the audience gasped. That line is wrong. In Roxbury, someone started crying. But he's only right because he's reading it wrong. The room froze. Line 127 says bipartite structure holds under infinite extension. Dr. Tanaka thinks I'm claiming it holds for all infinite extensions. That would be circular. Elijah walked to the board and picked up the stylus. His hand steadied as he wrote. But line 119 already defines that I'm only talking about periodic extensions. The bipartite property doesn't need separate proof. It's inherited from the periodicity constraint. Dr. Brooks checked the notebook. He's right. Line 119 limits the domain. Tanaka's objection doesn't apply. But Whitfield was already pressing forward. He turned to face Elijah directly, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every corner of the silent room. Elijah, let me ask directly, did you write this proof yourself or did someone help you? The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I wrote every word myself. Over 6 months? Yes, sir, during lunch periods. At a school with no advanced mathematics program? Yes, sir. Whitfield turned to the panel. I find it extraordinarily difficult to believe that a 10-year-old with no formal training independently developed a proof that eluded professional mathematicians for nearly 40 years. He didn't say you cheated, but everyone in the room heard it anyway. Dr. Park's voice was measured. Dr. Whitfield, are you formally challenging the authenticity of this work? I'm suggesting we need verification. Give Elijah a related problem right now in front of this panel to demonstrate his process and understanding. The trap closed. Refuse and look guilty. Accept and risk failing in front of 600 experts on a live stream watched by tens of thousands. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo whispered at the screen, "Don't do it, baby." On stage, Elijah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Okay." Whitfield walked to the board and drew a Mobius strip. If we represent this topologically as a graph, how many colors do we need so that no adjacent regions share a color? It was a trick question. Mobius strips break conventional coloring rules. Elijah stared at it. 15 seconds passed. Can I ask a clarifying question? Of course. Because as a physical object, the answer is 3 colors, but that's topology, not graph theory. You're testing whether I know the difference. Whitfield blinked. Because if you want a graph theory problem on a Mobius strip, you need to define an embedding. Different embeddings give different chromatic numbers. Your question is ambiguous. Silence. Dr. Brooks laughed quietly, a genuine laugh. He just did it again. Whitfield's face reddened. That's a technicality. No, Lawrence, Dr. Ruiz's voice was sharp. That's rigor, which is precisely what you claimed to be testing. And then something shifted. Something broke. Elijah's voice cracked. Tears started. Not performative, not strategic, just a 10-year-old who had been awake for 27 hours, who had been questioned and doubted and accused and challenged and tested and dismissed, finally reaching the limit of what a 10-year-old can hold. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo stood up. Turn it off. But Miss Okonkwo, I said turn it off. I am not letting these children watch them break him. The 40 kids in that room had seen this before, in their parents, in their siblings, in themselves, brilliance crushed beneath the weight of people who decide before a single word is spoken that you don't belong. Back in the auditorium, Elijah looked at Whitfield with wet eyes. Can I finish my presentation, please? I don't think. Lawrence, Dr. Brooks stood. His voice filled the room like a bell. Let the boy finish. It was not a request. Elijah wiped his face with his sleeve, took a breath that shook on the way in, and steadied. Okay, he said. Let me finish. For the next 10 minutes, the auditorium was completely silent. Elijah walked through his proof step by step, not defending now, teaching. His voice grew steadier with each slide, each diagram, each careful logical step. This was his ground. This was where he knew beyond any doubt that he was right. He drew diagrams on the board, explained how periodic tilings create patterns that repeat infinitely, showed how the 4-color constraint holds when you limit the problem with precision. Every judge leaned forward. Even Whitfield, despite everything, could not look away. At the 14-minute mark, Dr. Brooks raised his hand, not hostile, genuinely curious. Elijah, your periodicity constraint, did you derive it from Hartwell's original paper, or did you develop it independently? I didn't read his paper until after I already had the idea, sir, but then I saw he'd been thinking about similar cases, so I used his framework. Is that okay? Brooks smiled, a real smile, full and warm. That's not okay, son. That's brilliant. You independently reinvented and then extended 40 years of research. Elijah nodded, kept going. At minute 18, he reached his conclusion. So, the original Hartwell conjecture, as stated, is unanswerable.
The question is too broad, but with the periodicity constraint added, the answer is yes. 4 colors always work, and the proof is constructive, meaning I can show you exactly how to do the coloring for any periodic graph. He paused, looked directly at Whitfield. Would anyone like me to demonstrate a specific example? The challenge was quiet, almost gentle, but unmistakable.
Whitfield opened his mouth, closed it. Dr. Ruiz spoke instead. Yes, can you demonstrate one of the classic unsolved cases? She pulled up an image, a complex periodic graph that had appeared in textbooks for years as an example of why the Hartwell conjecture might be unsolvable. Dozens of nodes, hundreds of possible connections. This one, she said. Elijah walked to the board and picked up the stylus. His hand steadied completely. For the next 3 minutes, he colored the graph in real time. Blue here, red there, yellow, green. He explained each choice as he made it, the logic clear enough for anyone to follow, complex enough that it was obviously not guesswork. The audience watched in complete silence. 50,000 people on the live stream held their collective breath. He stepped back. 4 colors. No adjacent regions sharing a color. The pattern repeating infinitely. The graph colored correctly, completely, definitively. Dr. Ruiz checked it, traced the edges with her finger, looked for errors, found none. Does anyone see a mistake? She asked the panel. Judges checked, rechecked. Dr. Brooks spoke quietly, carefully, with the gravity the moment deserved. No errors. The solution is valid. The room exploded. Standing ovation, people on their feet, applause thundering off the ceiling. Some were crying, a few were laughing from pure astonishment. But Elijah wasn't done. He turned to face Whitfield. His voice was still quiet. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. Dr. Whitfield, can I ask you a question now? Whitfield's jaw tightened. What? Yesterday, you said mathematics is a meritocracy, that the numbers don't care about my background, only my preparation. A pause. I believe you said that. I said that. So if the numbers don't care, Elijah said slowly, so why did you? Pin drop silence. You told me I didn't belong before I said a single word. His eyes were still wet, but his voice was completely steady. You tested me on problems that had nothing to do with my proof. You sent my work to someone else without asking me. You asked if someone helped me write it. You looked at Whitfield directly. You did all of that because you decided who I was before you looked at my mathematics. He paused. So I don't think mathematics is a meritocracy. I think you don't want it to be. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. In Roxbury, Dr. Okonkwo had turned the stream back on in time to catch these words. The room around her had gone completely silent. 40 children and 20 adults, frozen, staring at the screen. Elijah Brooks, age 10, had just named the thing that everyone knew and nobody said. Whitfield stood. His chair scraped loud in the silence. You're out of line. Dr. Brooks stood too. His voice rang through the auditorium like a verdict. No, Lawrence, he's exactly on the line. You've spent this entire symposium trying to prove Elijah didn't belong. He just proved that you don't believe in the meritocracy you've built your entire career on. Dr. Ruiz stood, then another judge, then another. The proof is valid, the solution is correct, and the way this child has been treated in the last 24 hours is a disgrace to this institution. Dr. Park looked at Whitfield steadily. Dr. Whitfield, as symposium founder, you have a responsibility here. 800 people in the auditorium, 50,000 on the live stream, news cameras recording every second. If Whitfield refused to acknowledge Elijah now, his career would end in public disgrace. If he acknowledged him, his ego would die. The silence stretched. 10 seconds, 20, 30. When Whitfield's voice came, it was barely above a whisper. Your proof is correct. Elijah didn't move. I'm sorry, sir, I couldn't hear you. It wasn't cruelty, it was necessity. The room needed to hear this. The world needed to hear this. Whitfield's face moved through emotions too complicated to name.
anger, humiliation, and somewhere beneath it all, something that might have been shame. Each word came out as though he was pulling his own teeth. Your proof is correct. You solved the conjecture. A breath. I'm wrong. The room detonated. Standing ovation, thunderous sustained applause. People were shouting. Some were openly crying. In Roxbury, the community center erupted. Kids screaming, adults jumping to their feet. Dr. Okonkwo covered her face with both hands. Tears streamed between her fingers. That's my student. That's my student. On stage, Elijah stood in the roaring noise, tears running freely down his face, not moving, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. The status had inverted completely. Whitfield was no longer the authority. Elijah was no longer the outsider. The entire power structure of the room had flipped in front of the world, and everyone knew it. But then Elijah did something nobody expected. He walked towards Whitfield, slowly, deliberately. The crowd quieted, watching, uncertain what was about to happen. He stopped in front of the man who had tried to destroy him, and extended his hand. Dr. Whitfield, thank you for the symposium. Without this forum, I wouldn't have had a place to share this. Whitfield stared at the offered hand. Cameras flashed across the auditorium. This moment would appear on the front page of every science journal in the world. He had no choice. He took Elijah's hand. They shook. The photograph would capture it perfectly. The renowned professor and the 10-year-old who beat him. The old guard and the new. The moment when everything changed. Later, people would ask Elijah why he thanked the man who had humiliated him. His answer would be simple. Because the math was bigger than both of us, and I wanted him to remember that. 30 minutes later, backstage, Elijah was surrounded by reporters and professors and people wanting photographs. His face ached from smiling. Dr. Park approached with an envelope. Elijah, there's something you should know. She opened it. Inside, official symposium letterhead. She read aloud. Dear Symposium Committee, I am writing to recommend a student for this year's Emerging Minds Award. His name is Elijah Brooks. She stopped, looked up. This was written last week, before your presentation. Who wrote it? Dr. Park turned the letter around and showed the signature. Dr. Lawrence Whitfield. Everyone around them went quiet. Dr. Brooks checked the date, 3 days before the symposium, after he reviewed your initial submission. The twist settled over the room like a slow tide. Whitfield had known. He had known the proof was correct before any of this started, before the dismissive hand wave, before the humiliation, before everything. Dr. Okonkwo, who had arrived from Roxbury by this point, read the letter twice. So he tried to destroy you to save his reputation. She looked up. Where is he? They found Whitfield in a side hallway, alone, packing his briefcase with methodical, mechanical movements. Elijah approached. Whitfield didn't look up. I suppose you want an explanation. I want to know why you wrote that letter. Whitfield stopped, a long silence. Then he looked at Elijah, and something in his face was different now, smaller, more honest. Because when I read your proof, it reminded me why I fell in love with mathematics, before egos, before politics, before career strategy. He looked away. Just the beauty of a logical argument that holds. He looked away. Then I saw you on that stage, young and small and certain in the way that only someone who's found something genuinely true can be certain. And everyone was looking at me, at how I would respond, and I got scared. He exhaled slowly, scared that if you were right, I'd wasted 40 years chasing something a child figured out in 6 months during lunch breaks. Scared of what people would think, so I tried to make you smaller. His hands weren't steady. I'm sorry. It wasn't a Hollywood redemption. It was messy and human and incomplete. I forgive you. Elijah said, genuinely surprised. Why? Because I still want to learn from you. A pause. If you'll teach me. That was the moment Elijah Brooks became not just a mathematician, but a great one. Because great mathematicians understand that mathematics is bigger than any ego. Always. 1 week later, the headlines ran in every major publication from Boston to Beijing. 10-year-old solves 40-year-old mathematical conjecture. Boston Globe. Child prodigy rewrites mathematical history. Nature. Elijah Brooks and the problem that stumped the world. The Guardian. Elijah appeared on Good Morning America, blinking in the studio lights with his glasses sliding down his nose. MIT offered him full library access. 3 universities announced future scholarship commitments. The Roxbury Community Math Center received $2 million in donations. Dr. Whitfield made a substantial personal contribution quietly. But the moment that mattered most happened back at Booker T. Washington Elementary. Elijah stood in front of his 4th grade classroom, mostly kids of color, mostly from families like his, kids who had been told in 1,000 small and large ways, through underfunded schools, through lowered expectations, through all the invisible signals that accumulate into a worldview, that brilliance was not meant for them. Miss Johnson asked me to talk about what happened. He looked out at their faces. I don't really know what to say, except I'm the same person I was 2 weeks ago. I just had a question and I kept asking it until I found an answer. A boy in the front row raised his hand. But you're a genius. No, Elijah shook his head. I just like math, and I had a teacher who believed I could do it. He looked towards the back of the room.
Dr. Okonkwo stood there smiling, leaning against the wall. The only difference between me and you is I got a chance to try. He looked back at his classmates. So my question is, what do you want to try? The classroom erupted. Hands shot up. Voices called out dreams that had been living silently in 30 small hearts, waiting for permission to be spoken out loud. 3 months later, 2 more students from Booker T. Washington Elementary qualified for the National Math Olympiad. 5 students from the Roxbury Community Math Center won state competitions. Applications to STEM programs from underrepresented students across Boston increased by 340%. Not because of Elijah, because of what Elijah proved was possible. Elijah Brooks didn't just solve a mathematical conjecture, he solved a deeper question, one we should have been asking all along. How much brilliance are we losing because we decide who belongs before they get a chance to prove it? Sometimes the most important proof isn't written on paper. Sometimes it's the proof that the only limits that truly matter are the ones we refuse to accept. Have you ever been counted out before you got the chance to be counted? Tell us your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today.